Opposition leaders redirected their march toward the presidential palace, and a deliberate provocation that escalated tensions dramatically.
Gunfire suddenly erupted, with snipers on rooftops. People died while both sides blamed each other, completely. Venezuela's poor majority in hillside slums mobilized massively, demanding Chavez's return and rejecting the coup. American officials denied involvement, while declassified documents later revealed they knew about plotting and didn't warn. The coup attempt permanently poisoned U.S.-Venezuela relations, creating deep distrust that would last for decades.
His Misiones programs genuinely reduced poverty and illiteracy, creating real improvements for Venezuela's poorest citizens.
Through Petrocaribe, Chavez provided subsidized oil to allies, using Venezuela's resources to buy international influence strategically. Chavez increasingly suppressed opposition media and protests, eroding democratic institutions despite electoral legitimacy and popular support.
Venezuela's economy became dangerously dependent solely on oil, while manufacturing and agriculture collapsed under socialist policies. Revolutionary elites became corrupt boliburgueses, enriching themselves while preaching socialism, betraying core revolutionary ideals hypocritically.
Venezuela possessed the world's largest proven oil reserves, transforming petroleum into a powerful geopolitical weapon strategically.
Venezuela's oil history began with discovery in 1920s, leading to OPEC founding and eventual nationalization. Oil prices skyrocketed from $20 to $140 per barrel, flooding Venezuela with cash. Through Petrocaribe, Venezuela provided subsidized oil to 18 Caribbean and Central American nations, buying loyal allies.
Recipient nations could pay later with favorable terms, creating financial dependency on Venezuelan generosity and oil.
Countries like Haiti and Jamaica celebrated Venezuelan oil subsidies that kept economies running during global crises. Washington watched anxiously as Venezuela's oil diplomacy expanded Caracas's influence at American expense throughout a hemisphere. China provided billions in loans to Venezuela, secured by future oil deliveries, creating strategic partnership.
Despite massive reserves, Venezuela's oil production collapsed from 3.5 million to 1 million barrels.
State oil company PDVSA suffered from corruption, political appointments, and chronic underinvestment, causing catastrophic operational decay. Thousands of skilled petroleum engineers fled Venezuela, taking decades of expertise and crippling production capabilities.
American sanctions targeted Venezuela's oil sector, directly blocking exports and crippling the regime's primary revenue source.
Without oil to give, Petrocaribe collapsed, and Venezuela's carefully built regional influence disappeared almost overnight.
Maduro resorted to black market oil sales through intermediaries to India and Turkey, evading sanctions.
Decades of mismanagement created environmental catastrophes, with massive oil spills poisoning rivers and communities throughout Venezuela. Venezuela's once mighty oil infrastructure became rusty ruins, symbolizing catastrophic waste of world's greatest petroleum reserves.
Venezuela transformed its greatest strategic asset into a weapon that ultimately destroyed the nation's economy completely.
Before Chavez, Venezuela was once Latin America's wealthiest, most stable democracy, with thriving middle-class prosperity. Massive oil wealth funded infrastructure, education, healthcare, making Venezuela envy of developing world for decades. Historically, the United States and Venezuela enjoyed warm strategic partnership with robust trade, diplomatic cooperation, and mutual interests.
Deep cultural connections existed, with thousands of Venezuelans studying in America, sharing baseball passion and values.
Venezuela became so wealthy that citizens famously shopped in Miami, saying, "It's cheap, give me two."
Venezuela nationalized oil in 1976, taking control from American companies but maintaining generally cooperative relations. Venezuela's Punto Fijo Pact created stable two-party democracy but excluded masses, breeding eventual resentment systematically.
When oil prices crashed in the 1980s, Venezuela's prosperity ended abruptly, forcing painful international monetary austerity.
The Caracazo riots in 1989 saw military massacre hundreds, shattering Venezuela's democratic image. Traditional political elite grew corrupt, enriching themselves, while ordinary Venezuelans suffered economic decline and disillusionment.
Washington supported Venezuela's corrupt elite as stable partners, ignoring growing inequality and popular anger brewing.
Venezuela's celebrated middle class collapsed into poverty, while shantytown slums expanded across Caracas hillsides dramatically. By 1990s, traditional parties lost all legitimacy as Venezuelans rejected establishment politicians as corrupt thieves. Despite social problems, Venezuela remained major U.S. oil supplier, with billions in annual trade, creating economic.
Chavez's failed 1992 coup attempt terrified elites, revealing military discontent and systemic crisis depth.
By late 1990s, Venezuela was a powder keg of anger, inequality, corruption, awaiting a spark for explosion.
Venezuela became a critical pawn on the global chessboard, where superpowers competed for influence and advantage. China invested over $60 billion in Venezuelan oil infrastructure technology, securing energy and geopolitical foothold.
Russia sold Venezuela billions in advanced weapons, including fighter jets and air defense systems, militarizing regime.
Russian strategic bombers conducted exercises from Venezuelan bases, deliberately provoking and challenging American regional dominance directly. Venezuela's alliances with Russia and China directly challenged America's Monroe Doctrine and hemispheric influence fundamentally. Venezuela led ALBA alliance, creating socialist bloc with Cuba and Nicaragua, countering US-backed regional organizations.
U.S. intelligence warned of possible Hezbollah presence in Venezuela, raising terrorism concerns and security threats. Russian intelligence operated from Venezuela, conducting cyber operations and espionage against American interests from close range.
China secured long-term Venezuelan oil contracts, ensuring energy security while gaining strategic foothold in Americas. Turkey helped Venezuela evade sanctions through gold trade and financial networks, creating unexpected strategic partnerships. America responded by increasing military presence and sanctions, triggering regional arms race and escalating tensions. Latin America split between pro-American governments and anti-American socialist bloc, creating ideological continental divide deeply.
Venezuela owed China over $20 billion in oil-backed debt, raising questions about sovereignty loss.
Venezuela and Russia explored cryptocurrency and blockchain technology to circumvent Western sanctions and financial isolation. Russian military advisors embedded with Venezuelan forces, providing training, intelligence, and advanced communication systems secretly. Washington increasingly viewed Venezuela as a multifaceted national security threat, requiring comprehensive strategic response and containment.
Ordinary Venezuelans suffered as their country became proxy battlefield where global superpowers competed for influence. Venezuela remained trapped in geopolitical chess match with no clear winner, just ongoing suffering and stalemate. The United States faces a critical choice between military intervention and diplomatic negotiation, with uncertain outcomes either way.
Military intervention might topple Maduro quickly, but would likely create prolonged occupation nightmare, repeating past mistakes.
Invasion could trigger guerrilla resistance, massive refugee crisis, and regional instability, with catastrophic humanitarian consequences.
Diplomatic solution requires patient negotiation, compromise, and trust building, which seems nearly impossible after decades. The policy debate continues whether sanctions pressure a regime or simply punish innocent civilians without achieving goals.
Some propose regional Latin American solution, with neighbors mediating rather than US-dominated intervention approach.
Ordinary Venezuelans grow exhausted from crisis, focused on daily survival rather than political change or protest.
Millions of Venezuelan exiles may never return, permanently altering national demographics and losing entire generation. Venezuelan economic recovery requires restoring oil production, attracting investment, and rebuilding expertise over multiple decades. Restoring democracy requires comprehensive institutional reconstruction, including elections, judiciary, media, and military reform. Fundamentally,
national reconciliation requires balancing justice for victims with political stability, a delicate and painful process.
American policymakers face imperfect options, with each approach carrying significant costs, risks, and uncertain outcomes realistically. Russian and Chinese influence in Venezuela represents broader shift toward multipolar world order, challenging American dominance. Regardless of political solutions, immediate humanitarian relief remains urgent moral imperative as suffering continues daily. History teaches that regime change operations rarely achieve intended outcomes and often create worse unintended consequences. Venezuela's path forward spans decades, with democratic transition possible by 2030, recovery perhaps by 2040. Despite despair, resistance continues among youth and civil society, remembering that whoever gets tired loses battle. Venezuela's story remains unfinished, with sunrise potentially approaching, but darkness still present. The saga continues unfolding now. Thanks for watching this Shadow Wars documentary, exploring the complex relationship.
A multi-million-dollar contract was allegedly signed to launch a covert military operation to kidnap the sitting president.
Operation Gideon launched in May 2020 as mercenaries attempted an amphibious invasion using small, simple fishing boats.
But Venezuelan intelligence was waiting for them, having infiltrated their communications long before the boats ever left Colombia.
The raid failed spectacularly within minutes, as Venezuelan forces intercepted the invaders before they could even reach land.
The captured Americans were sentenced to 20 years in prison, becoming political pawns in a much larger game.
The incident destroyed any remaining chance of diplomacy, proving that the Shadow War had officially turned hot and dangerous. Global rivals like Russia and China used this embarrassment to mock American influence and strengthen their support for Maduro. Washington realized that covert operations were risky, shifting their strategy back towards crippling economic sanctions and diplomatic pressure. While the leaders played spy games, the people of Venezuela continued to suffer under the weight of political chaos. Operation Gideon remains one of the most bizarre and poorly planned chapters in the history of modern covert warfare. Do you believe the US government was truly unaware of this plot? Let us know in the comments below.
In 2024, the United States made a bold move that shocked the entire diplomatic world.
The Department of Justice claimed the plane was purchased illegally, violating strict American economic sanctions against Venezuela.
The aircraft had been sitting quietly in the Dominican Republic, far from Venezuelan skies and protection. American federal agents swooped in, boarded the aircraft, and seized it without firing a single warning shot. The plane was flown directly to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, becoming a trophy in America's escalating pressure campaign.
This wasn't just about one plane. It symbolized Washington's hunt for assets purchased with alleged corruption money. The United States had been tracking Maduro's luxury purchases for years, building a comprehensive legal case patiently.
Venezuela's government found itself diplomatically isolated, with few powerful allies willing to challenge American asset seizures publicly.
Caracas argued this violated international law and national sovereignty. Washington claimed it enforced legitimate financial regulations.
Global media erupted with coverage, turning a single aircraft into a symbol of hemispheric power struggles. Analysts warned this seizure was just the beginning of a systematic campaign to strip assets globally.
The Dominican Republic faced awkward questions about why they allowed the seizure on their sovereign territory.
The Treasury Department added this seizure to their growing portfolio of actions designed to economically strangle the regime. Venezuelan officials started hiding remaining assets, moving them constantly, fearing American investigators tracked everything they owned everywhere. The plane seizure raised profound questions about where national sovereignty ends and international law enforcement begins. Venezuelan oil exports collapsed from nearly 2 million barrels daily to barely 500,000 almost overnight. The U.S. Treasury designated dozens of Venezuelan officials, freezing assets and banning American business dealings completely. Ordinary Venezuelans suffered catastrophically as sanctions choked imports of food, medicine, and basic essential survival supplies. Critics argued sanctions were collective punishment, harming innocent civilians while Maduro's elite insulated themselves from suffering. American financial pressure made it nearly impossible for Venezuela to conduct international trade or access banking systems. The U.S. even moved to seize Citgo, Venezuela's valuable American refining subsidiary, worth billions in total.
American foreign policy experts bitterly debated whether sanctions advanced democracy or simply created humanitarian catastrophe and suffering.
Venezuela experienced one of the worst economic collapses in modern history, making currency practically worthless paper.
Hyperinflation reached unimaginable levels, exceeding 1,000,000% annually at its absolute catastrophic peak point.
People needed wheelbarrows of cash just to buy bread, as currency value disintegrated hour by hour.
The collapse didn't happen overnight. It was a slow-motion train wreck spanning nearly a full decade. Venezuela's oil industry, once Latin America's crown jewel, crumbled from neglect, corruption, and international sanctions combined.
Supermarket shelves stood empty as imports vanished and domestic production collapsed under economic chaos and pressure.
Hospitals ran out of basic medicines and supplies. Doctors performed surgeries without anesthesia or antibiotics available. The electrical grid collapsed repeatedly, leaving entire cities in darkness for days or weeks without reliable power. Desperate citizens scavenged through garbage for food scraps, an unthinkable reality in once prosperous oil-rich Venezuela. The government's solution was printing more money, which only accelerated the hyperinflationary death spiral faster. Venezuelans abandoned their own currency entirely, using US dollars or barter for absolutely all transactions daily. Venezuela's economy shrank by over 75%, comparable only to war-torn nations and total disasters.
Middle-class families who once thrived could barely afford one meal daily, surviving on rice and hope. The regime's elite continued living luxuriously while ordinary Venezuelans starved, creating explosive inequality.
The government desperately renamed the currency multiple times, removing zeros, but nothing stopped the collapse.
Businesses collapsed by the thousands as operating became impossible. Entrepreneurship died under economic devastation completely.
Economists compared Venezuela's crisis to Zimbabwe and Weimar Germany, among history's worst economic catastrophes ever recorded.
Venezuela transformed from Latin America's richest nation into a desperate survival nightmare within one devastating generation. The United States instantly recognized Guaido, triggering a domino effect across over 50 countries globally recognizing him.
The United Nations became a battleground, with Western nations backing Guaido, while Russia and China supported Maduro.
As weeks turned to months, Guaido's momentum stalled. Maduro refused to leave and controlled all institutions.
The military remained loyal to Maduro because generals profited enormously from corruption, drug trafficking, and smuggling operations.
America tried sending humanitarian aid across the Colombian border, but Maduro's forces blocked and burned the trucks.
American policymakers debated next steps. Military intervention was considered but ultimately rejected as too risky politically.
Guaido's relevance faded as years passed without achieving power. International support quietly evaporated and disappeared completely. Maduro controlled all meaningful territory, institutions, and weapons, while opposition controlled little beyond symbolic international recognition. Venezuela's economic collapse triggered one of the largest migration crises in modern Western Hemisphere history, globally.
Over 5.6 million Venezuelans fled their homeland, escaping hunger, violence, and absolute hopelessness desperately. Families abandoned everything they owned, carrying only backpacks with photographs and desperate dreams of survival somewhere better. Many walked thousands of dangerous miles through jungles, deserts, and mountains, facing robbery, assault, and death.
Venezuelans scattered across Latin America and beyond, with Colombia absorbing nearly 2 million desperate refugees alone.
Border towns were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of arrivals, creating massive humanitarian challenges for neighboring countries.
Highly educated professionals became street vendors, cleaners, or beggars abroad because degrees meant nothing without legal status. Refugee camps sprouted across borders where families lived in tents without adequate sanitation, food, or medical care. Some host communities grew hostile, blaming Venezuelan migrants for crime, unemployment, and social problems, creating tension.
Migrants sent billions in remittances back home. becoming Venezuela's largest source of foreign income and survival.
Migration outcomes varied wildly. Some found stability and opportunity, while others faced homelessness and exploitation abroad. Tens of thousands reached the United States southern border seeking asylum, creating political debates about immigration. Latin American countries held emergency summits, trying to coordinate regional response to the unprecedented migration crisis.
Migrant children faced language barriers, discrimination, and trauma while trying to integrate into completely foreign school systems.
Elderly Venezuelans who couldn't migrate stayed behind in ghost towns, dependent on remittances from children abroad. The Venezuelan exodus rivaled Syria's refugee crisis in scale, yet received far less international attention and aid. Venezuelan diaspora maintained fierce national identity abroad, dreaming of eventual return to a free homeland someday. Venezuela became a hollowed nation, losing its young, talented, and desperate, while leaving behind only ruins and memories.
Maduro barely won the April election with only 50.6%, a shockingly narrow victory.
The opposition cried fraud, sparking violent protests that nearly destabilized the transition of power completely. Under Maduro, economic problems that Chavez managed through oil wealth spiraled into complete catastrophic collapse rapidly. By 2014, massive anti-government protests erupted as Venezuelans blamed Maduro for accelerating economic and social collapse.
The Chavista movement fractured between true believers disappointed in Maduro